Recognized member for Sandwich North and the Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's my honour to rise and speak to Bill 52, the Agricultural Land Commission Amendment Act. Certainly this is an issue that I'm glad to see. There are issues in this bill that I'm glad to see that are being dealt with by the appropriate level of government, Madam Speaker. I'm certainly not as experienced at agriculture as the member is from Delta South, that's for sure. I can't say that 3 generations of my family have been in agriculture, but I certainly can say that many countless generations of my family have been harvesting and developing food harvesting areas within the territories of the Saanich for countless generations. And so, while it might not have been what we see today as agriculture, I would like to acknowledge that we have a long history of developing 100% of the food that was eaten and consumed, and in fact traded in a commercial way right here in our territory. And I certainly think that this is something that we need to be working towards, is ensuring that we are ensuring the food security. And while I do agree that farming requires farmers, farming also requires farmland, and so I think that it is important that we look after the jurisdiction that is ours, which is the Agricultural Land Commission Act and the Agricultural Land Reserve. That is indeed a provincial piece of legislation, and it is indeed our responsibility to make sure that it is doing what it needs to do and doing what it should be doing, which is governing the agricultural land within the Agricultural Land Reserve. Certainly, I have some experience from the perspective of a local councillor as well in the district of Central Saanich. I was the former councillor there, and we had 70% of the land within our district was in the ALR, meaning 30% of the land paid most of the bills, which was really an interesting municipality to be sitting around the council table on, and certainly a lot of what happened in the Agricultural Land Reserve impacted our community in deep ways. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that while, in response to the member from Delta South, while it is under the purview of district councils to make these changes one community by one, it is certainly within the purview of the provincial government to look after its own legislation, and to update this bill would mean that it doesn't require numbers and numbers of municipalities to all go through the highly intensive process that we went through to get a soil deposit and amendment or soil deposit and removal bylaw in our community. Took 13 months. It took 13 months, Honourable Speaker, because it sat on the minister of the former government's desk while we tried to determine what kind of impact this was going to have on the development community in this particular area. And that was the question that we were asked, Honourable Speaker, when we went to find out why it was that bill wasn't signed off, because we were wondering what it was going to, what kind of impact, or it was the government at the time was wondering what kind of impact it was going to have on the holes that were being dug for large buildings, as the member pointed out. So by amending this bylaw and by fixing it at the provincial level, then we don't have the 13-month delays that certainly many chunks of asphalt were dumped on agricultural land day in and day out while we were waiting for the sign-off on that bill. Another piece that I'd like to point out, and it might just be some language, but I'd like to acknowledge the women in agriculture. I know that we often use language here that he and him and it's his farm, but I think that it's important because many of the incredible workers in agriculture, operating farms, running farms in my riding, Honourable Speaker, are women, and I would like to just raise my hands to the women that are working in the agricultural land. You know, it's interesting. We hear that the slogan continually raised now. I guess it's just brand new, fresh. It's like BC Fresh or something. The slogan "Opportunity for All," and I imagine that we're going to continue to hear it as mantra get repeated in this place over and over: opportunity, opportunity for all. The other slogan is winning takes work, apparently, and we haven't heard that one too often. But I'd like to say that it is the mantra that I've heard, Honourable Speaker, from the agricultural, the farmers in my riding, the work of agriculture. And I think that it's important that we are acknowledging and raising our hands to those who are doing the work. And yesterday, I had the opportunity, was it yesterday or maybe the day before, I had the opportunity to meet with farmers, as did the members from all parts of this House, and I acknowledged the hands. See, because I come from a family that we didn't produce food. My family produced. We were in horticulture, and whenever I talked about the dirt, my grandfather would shake his big mitts at me and say, "You know, Adam, I don't work," or member from, can I even refer to myself as my own name? Anyway, he said, "You know," I can? Okay, he said, "Grandson," he said, "Grandson, I don't work in dirt, I work in soil." And my grandfather was a man that always reminded me that we come from the soil, and that he worked in the soil. And so I acknowledged, while I was sitting around the table in the hotel next door, the hands, the mitts, and the soil that was under the fingernails, and the hands of the farmers. And so I do raise my hands, which are much softer and much less worthy, to the agricultural workers, the farmers, the ranchers, the orchardists, the people who produce food for us and for our children and for our grandchildren. So with that, I would just like to say that the BC Green Caucus is very supportive of the three main aspects of this piece of legislation. We are certainly, and have been for quite a period of time now, going back before my time in this place, have been encouraging government to impose limits on the house sizes that can be built on agricultural land. We've seen the agricultural ALR prime farmland being turned from agricultural uses to rural estate uses, and certainly the more urban you get, the more threat there is to that land. And so limiting this, even though it was in the guidelines, limiting house sizes to 5,400 square feet within this bill is very welcome from our caucus's perspective. And as we've seen, the impact of speculation on land, all zones throughout British Columbia, farmland has certainly become a casualty of that. And so we are very much welcome to the limiting of house sizes on agricultural land. And I'd like to acknowledge the comment that was made from the member, by the member from Delta South, with respect to home plates, because this is a piece of work that absolutely still needs to be done, and that we need to continue to push, because it's not just the size of house, but it is, as was mentioned, the siting of the house. If you put a 5,400 square foot house in the middle of prime agricultural land, you've still limited the capacity of that land to produce in an uninterrupted way. And I recognize that, because it's not just the 5,400 square foot house, it's the 100, 200, 300 meter driveway that goes up, and so much of that land is now interrupted and has asphalt on it, or even gravel on it, but concrete on it. So I certainly am very, very supportive of the government moving, and as the minister stated, this is one of maybe multiple parts, us moving further down the road towards the siting of homes, the home plate. And I think the other thing too, which comes up, and I represent Gulf Island communities, Honourable Speaker, and one of the things that comes up for me is that much of the farmland, agricultural land on the Gulf Island communities is operated now by multiple families that have kind of gone in together, and they've purchased the land, and they're working the land together, and because that's the only way that they can afford it, frankly. And so they ask me the questions about multiple homes being built, and can multiple homes be built on agricultural land? And of course, we know that there's significant limitations, and for good reason, Honourable Speaker. I respect the comments that were made that there could be, 2 homes maybe built on a piece of farmland, but that would be the limit. One of the questions that gets brought to me, and I'm not resolved on this issue, Honourable Speaker, but it's one issue that I think that we can explore a little bit further, and that perhaps all sides of this House can explore, is if we set a home plate size and we set a square footage size, maybe we can allow for some flexibility from that owner within the home plate, within the square footage size. And it's just something that I put out there, that if we have a limit of 5,400 square feet and we have a home plate with which you can build, then perhaps maybe multiple families, or you could have a couple of different dwellings there, so that multiple families there's some flexibility there. So I'll just leave it at that. I've talked to a number of people in the Gulf Islands that this impacts, that they don't have that flexibility, and I did let them know that I would raise it, and I'd raise it with the minister, and we'd put it out there and see what happens with it. I did mention when it came to a legal fill, the frustration that we had in the District of Central Saanich, and I'm glad that we've responded to the challenges that we had with development fill coming in from the urban centers into the rural lands and the agricultural lands. And certainly it was a long and painful process for us to get to where we're at. And so I am very, very supportive of the action that the government's taking to remove this as an option, let's say. And again, I have some questions about enforcement. That was the big issue that we had, was, okay, it's great to have this soil deposit and fill bylaw, but if we're not resourcing the Agricultural Land Commission with enough money to actually enforce, then that is causing significant problems. So I would just say that we absolutely support the move to regulate this more strictly, and as well, I'd say that we could even go a step further and work with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and maybe have some coordination around tracking development fill and putting some recommendations in place where these two ministries and these two bills can interact to say, look, if you are the Metro, or you are the CRD, or you are have an urbanized part of your district, then you should, if you're getting a building permit, you should be tracking that hole that is being dug in the fill that's coming from it. Finally, I would say that it is welcome, and it was part of the platform of the BC Green Caucus, to move back from 2 zones to a single zone. And I'd just say that in this context, it did threaten, that the change to 2 zones did threaten agricultural land. It opened it up. It said that some lands were more capable while other lands are not. We do know that lands outside of the more mild climates of southwestern British Columbia are also very valuable for their agricultural production. And just because there's snow on them for parts of the year doesn't mean that we should leave those vulnerable, or that they should have a different set of values. It's still about food production. It's still about making sure that we can provide the food like we have in this province, that we can eat food that's grown here. So on those notes, I would just like to congratulate the minister. We share Saanich. She Saanich South, I Saanich North. A lot of agricultural land within our 2 jurisdictions, and I know as the former critic on this file and farmer, that this has been something that has been long awaited from the minister and from the member from Saanich South. So I'd like to congratulate the minister on the good work that's been done. You have the support. We will be going into some details on this bill as we go through committee stage. But congratulations, and thank you, Honourable Speaker, for the opportunity to speak at second reading.